This video, I'm going to go over cost curves and profit maximization using graphical representation, as well as shutdown conditions. So we talked about this in class on Monday, and it seemed like maybe some of you weren't getting it, so I wanted to do maybe try to do a reference video for you. Okay, so let's review where we're at. We have the unique situation where we have a competitive industry and none, which means that we have small customers, small buyers who have no market power. We have small identical suppliers who all have the same cost curves. And because they're small, they also don't have market power. Okay, so that generates a horizontal demand curve where we have this unique condition where price is equal to marginal revenue. And then we're looking for that point. So we have the firm's marginal cost curve, the firm's average total cost curve, and the firm's average variable cost curve. And we're looking for the point to find profit maximization where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So we're going to be looking for the point where the marginal cost curve crosses the price equals marginal revenue curve, right? So marginal cost, that's the cost of producing one more unit. Average variable cost is the variable costs of producing a unit minus, um, sorry, divided by the quantity. So that number initially starts high and then gets low and then starts to get higher again as we account for the greater cost of acquiring additional units of labor, additional units of capital, additional units of supply, and so forth. Average total cost curve is always going to be bigger than the average variable cost because it includes not only the variable costs, but also the fixed costs. Okay, so average fixed cost, which we don't have drawn on here, starts very high. And then because the fixed costs themselves never change, as opposed to the variable costs, which do go up as you increase per unit, as you increase quantity, the fixed cost is like something like rent, for example. If you're paying $1,000 a month in rent, you start, when you do one unit, you're doing $1,000 per unit in average fixed cost. As you do two units, 1,000 divided by two, you drop to 500. 1,000 divided by three, you drop to 333. 1,000 divided by four, you're down to 250, right? And so you get this downward sloping curve. So we have here are so we have our curves. So let's look now where the profit maximizing quantity is where the marginal cost crosses the average, the marginal revenue. So we find that cross point, draw a line down to the quantity, and that gives us our profit maximizing quantity. As we draw that line down from the intersection between marginal cost and marginal revenue, where that line crosses the average total cost, that becomes the total cost, average total cost that the firm has at that particular quantity. And this becomes important here in a second. So now the firm's total revenue at the profit maximizing quantity is going to be the quantity times the price. So P times Q gives us our total revenue. So the firm's total revenue is represented by the area of this rectangle here. The firm's total cost is going to be the average total cost per unit times the number of units. So where the green area is still the same, was the total revenue, the blue area now is the total cost. And so you can see the total cost rectangle is smaller than the green total revenue rectangle. And so what's left over, the area that's not covered by the total cost, is the firm's profit. Okay. What happens if price falls? Well, our initial price falls, we look for a new point where price equals marginal revenue equals marginal cost. So we look for this point where the new price line crosses the marginal cost curve, and that's going to be here. So that becomes our new profit maximizing quantity. So we shift downward from Q1 to Q2 when price falls from P1 to P2. That now gives us our new profit maximizing quantity. Now our total revenues have shrunk. our total revenue is now P2 times Q2. So this whole rectangle here is our new total revenue, whereas before it was P1 times Q1. So it's shrunk down to this smaller rectangle. The total cost is based on the average total cost. So we take the quantity line that we're drawing down from the intersection between marginal cost and marginal revenue to where it crosses the average total cost curve. And then we draw a line over to the price curve, and that price axis, or the dollar axis, and that gives us our average total cost. So average total cost times quantity gives us the rectangle representing total cost. And what's left over when you subtract total cost from total revenue is profit. And notice the profit is getting smaller as total cost starts to occupy more of the total revenue. So if price falls again, this reaches our first important point. Here we have the unique situation where price is equal to marginal cost, as well as when we draw that new profit maximizing quantity down up, right? That intersection between marginal cost and marginal revenue is also where both the marginal cost and marginal revenue lines intersect the average total cost. So the total revenue for this at P3 is P3 times Q, right, for total revenue. But P3 is equal to average total cost. And so we have this situation where total revenue is equal to total cost. And so there is no longer a wedge of profit here. So this is an important point. Um, there is no profit. Now, what uh, and this is normal. This is the normal equilibrium under perfect competition. Now you say, well, what firm is going to want to work without any profits? And what economists mean here is a normal profit, right? And so that has a specific meaning. And what it means is that the firm is actually earning a profit. It is the required profit to stay in business for an industry. So if this industry has a normal profit of 10%, that's built into the average total cost of the firm. So that's kind of like just one more cost that's being accounted for, is the firm has to make a certain amount of profit. In the previous slides, so here, this profit would have represented something more than the normal profit. So maybe perhaps it represented a 15% profit. So this is where firms in a competitive market operate. They get competed down to where they make no profit or no abnormal or excess profit. They're just making what economists call normal profits, right? So they can operate forever at this point where average total cost equals marginal revenue. They can operate forever here because they're making that normal profit expected by the industry. This is the first situation where we have to consider shutting down, right? So at this point, I want to take into consideration average variable cost. So just like we did before, where we looked at where the profit maximizing quantity line goes through the average total cost line, we can also look where it goes through the average variable cost line, and that gives us our average variable cost at this quantity. And so, if you remember from finance, if you took finance with me, the contribution margin is the price minus the variable cost. So in this case, the firm has a positive contribution margin that it can continue, that it will, such that it will continue to operate, and the contribution margin will cover all of the fixed costs. So this is why the firm can continue to function. Now, in this situation, we now have a fourth price line, and I've deleted the other ones, but what you can see is the P4 is now below the average total cost, right? So I've drawn a new line here to represent average total, the low point of average total cost. So this firm is now operating with a price that is below its average total cost. So we still look for where does marginal revenue, the price, equal marginal cost. That still gives us the profit maximizing quantity. So they're going to want to operate here at this price. They're going to want to do this Q at this price. The total revenue, right, you see here, is still the price times the quantity. The problem is that the total cost per unit is greater than the price that they're actually earning. So for every unit that they, well, so in this situation, at this quantity Q, they're actually generating a overall loss because their costs are greater, their total costs, which is the blue rectangle, are greater than the green rectangle's total revenue. So in the long run, this firm is going to want to shut down because average total costs are greater than the price that they can earn. But they're going to they're going to continue to operate in the short run, because in the short run they may not be able to get out of their lease, for example, and so they've still got a positive contribution margin because the price is greater than the average variable cost. And so this gap here, right, is actually a positive, gives us a positive contribution margin. So some money is being earned to cover some of the fixed costs. So it's better to cover some of the fixed costs than just shut down and not be able to cover any of the fixed costs. So this is really, you're not making any money, but you're trying to minimize your losses. Okay. So in the short run, we'll continue to operate as long as the price is greater than the average variable cost. So you can see here, so price is greater than average variable cost, which means that we have a positive contribution margin. That contribution margin is not enough to cover all of the fixed costs, but it'll cover some of it. So for example, maybe we're earning $500 um, in contribution margin, which can go against our $1,000 in fixed costs in rent, right? So instead of having, if we were to shut down, we would have to pay $1,000 in rent regardless. If we can at least earn $500, we can reduce the $1,000 rent fee that we're going to have to continue to pay. So in the short run, when we still have fixed costs that we can't get rid of, it can make sense to continue to operate as long as the price is greater than the average variable cost, because we have a positive contribution margin. Now, if the price keeps on falling, right, such that it falls below the average variable cost, then we wind up with a negative contribution margin, which means that for every unit we make, we actually lose money. So it costs us, say, $10 in variable costs to make something, and we're selling it at $5. That means every time we make something, never mind our fixed costs, we're losing $5 just on supplies. So at that point, right, we would shut down in the short run when price is less than average variable cost. So when the price line crosses the average variable cost line and gets lower than the average variable cost, the lowest average variable cost, that's when we're going to go ahead and shut down. Okay, so hopefully this is useful to you. I will go ahead and post the slides along with the video so that you can review both.